Hello, this lecture is on the Dutch Baroque, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. So what we're looking at here is the map of Europe in the 17th century, so the 1600s. And we just looked at the Italian Baroque, which is focused around Italy, the boot here. And what we'll be looking at today has to do with the Netherlands. Okay, so Holland is here, and you can see that it is this orange, and this is called the United Provinces of the Netherlands. And below it, you see Flanders, and this is territory of the Spanish Empire. Okay, and so there are going to be a lot of differences between Flemish art and Dutch art, but there are also similarities. So the two are often grouped together. So let me go ahead and delete this map, and we will get started. So apologies in advance if there are any oddities. I have a cat on my keyboard and not the decoy keyboard. Okay, so a few things to give us some background. Let us get started. So the Dutch Baroque is the 17th century in Holland and the Netherlands. And we're going to be seeing a lot more secular painting. So in the Italian Baroque that we just saw, we saw a lot of diagonals, and they had to be educational, right? They were very dynamic, but a lot of the images that we saw were based on religious imagery. And that's because the church was a major patron of the arts. And I mentioned how the Counter-Reformation had reaffirmed the importance of imagery to the Catholic faith, okay? But remember, the Dutch Republic is a Protestant nation. So we're not going to be seeing the commissions from the church. We're not going to be seeing the religious art. Okay, so this is a place where iconoclasm had taken place. So if you'll remember, that is the destruction of images that are seen as idolatrous by the Protestants. So think of those sculptures that had their faces chiseled off. Okay, so this sort of destruction. And one thing that you'll see is a lot of landscapes, and specifically seascapes. So a seascape is, right, water. Instead of land. And something that you'll notice in most Dutch landscape and seascape paintings at this time is roughly 1/3 of the painting features land or water, and then there's the horizon line, and approximately 2/3 is going to be the sky. And there's a reason for this. So remember how I have called the Netherlands the Low Countries before, and because they're much lower than other areas in Europe, they're below sea level. Okay, so Dutch geography is extremely low, and they reclaimed much of the land from the sea by building dikes. So dikes are a way of keeping water back. So not necessarily a dam. So this soil is very fertile because it is very close to the sea, and there's a lot of water, but there's always the threat of the incursion of water onto land. Okay, so this is just to kind of give you an idea, a feel for what Dutch Baroque art can look like. And a little bit more background. So there's a lot of war going on. There's the Dutch War for Independence, or it's called the 89 Years' War. And this is from 1568 to 1648. And so King Philip II of Spain is ruling the Netherlands, and he's heavily taxing the Dutch, and the Dutch are being forced to practice Catholicism. So this is at the same time as the Inquisition, and between 1523 and 1566, over 1,300 people are executed for heresy. So heresy is in some way related to arguing against what the Bible says, and that interpretation can be somewhat broad. It could be something as, antithetical to Christianity as, say, Satan worshiping, or it could be something like stating that the sun is the center of the universe and not the earth. So it's pretty broad. Okay, so there are a lot of details, and Spain loses control of Holland area. And then in 1609, there's a truce. They sign a ceasefire. But then the 30 Years' War happens from 1618 to 1648. And this involves Spain and the Netherlands, as well as many of the other countries that we've looked at. And again, this is because of conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics, as well as political and dynastic issues and conflicts, etc. So it ends in 1648 and leads to the political restructuring of Europe and the northern Netherlands, so the Orange area. Now the Dutch Republic becomes autonomous and they get rid of Spanish rule, okay? And they grant religious freedom. So Protestantism is the religion of the Netherlands, essentially. But you can also practice other types of religion in the Netherlands without being persecuted. Now, that's not to say that you can necessarily occupy quite the same status in society as someone who is a Protestant versus a Catholic, but you will not be persecuted for heresy. You won't have to undergo the Inquisition, none of that. Okay, and much of the Dutch Republic Protestantism is focused around Calvinism. So this has to do with predestination. So God chooses who will be saved. It's not based on characteristics or actions. It's unconditional, and very much valuing thrift and education, low interest rates, high literacy rates. Apologies for the noise. Anastasia is unsettled. And the Dutch have a lot of really important port cities, and they began trading with the Far East. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company is founded, giving the Dutch monopoly on Asian trade. So blue and white ware comes from Asia, and Holland starts to make replicas of these, and it's extremely popular, and they can only be gotten from Holland because they're the only ones with trade with Asia. So they have a monopoly until 1854 with Japan. So the Dutch Republic is the most prosperous nation in Europe, and it leads in terms of trade, science, and art. So within the Dutch Republic, social status is largely based on income. So you're not seeing clergy or the church with an outsized influence. You're not seeing aristocracy. Although, as I said before, this is religiously tolerant. Compared to other countries, wealth and social status tend to go almost exclusively to Protestants, but there are still Catholics and Jews present in the Netherlands. So Vermeer is a Catholic, and many of the models that Rembrandt used were Jewish, which was pretty revolutionary because he was depicting Jesus as a Jew, which is historically accurate but had not been done. And because it is such a tolerant climate, it attracts skilled people and scientists and tradesmen from all over Europe, and it also has a higher standard of living than anywhere else. And in Antwerp, the Protestant population in 1585 was told to convert to Catholicism or move to the Dutch Republic. And many of the Protestants who moved were skilled craftsmen or rich merchants. So a few things that we're going to see, characteristics of the Dutch Baroque art. And you can see here, right, this is a quintessentially Dutch landscape, in no small part because of this windmill here, but you can see the water and the dikes. And again, right, think about the 1/3, the horizon line at about 1/3 of the canvas. If you see that, typically it's Dutch. So we are going to see Baroque elements of tenebrism and shallow space and emotion. So this is by Ter Brueggen, and he is a follower of Caravaggio, although he's not using the same extremely dark tenebrism. You can see how this is a very crowded, shallow space, and he's using people who look like they could really be old men, you know, wrinkled clothing, tattered. Jesus is kind of cast off to the side. There's a lot of tenebrism. So we are going to see some of that, but not nearly as much. And something else that we're going to see, this is Saint Sebastian, also by Ter Brueggen. So this is another example. So something else that we're going to see is much more secular art. So the secular art is going to translate into a lot of portraits. Okay, so portraits are extremely popular. So you have this country with a lot of people who are very well off. You have merchants. So the middle class is doing quite well. And in the 17th century alone, between 750,000 and 1.1 million portraits are produced in the Netherlands. And you're going to see that the dress is oftentimes plainer, or at least the colors are more somber. And again, this relates to Protestantism. And you will not see a ton of standing poses because that can indicate pride. And many props and possessions are going to be left out because that displays materialism, etc. So we will see continued naturalism. It's much less grand than the art of Catholic countries. It lacks the exuberance, right? So again, think about the Protestants. They're kind of subdued, right? Strict. They have very specific laws that they live by. They're not given to mysticism. So we're not going to see that here. And another thing worth noting is that almost everything that we look at in terms of Dutch Baroque art is going to be painting or works on paper, so drawings or prints. We're not going to see very much sculpture. And this is because very little was produced at the time. Catholic veneration of statues, so the use of statues as icons and mediators between the people and God, right? This is seen as idolatrous, right? Idols. False gods. Okay, so this is what we're going to see. So this is by Frans Hals, and Frans Hals is identifiable in large part due to his brush strokes. And I'm going to get into that in just a little bit. But again, I want to draw your attention to the fact that these people are very well attired, okay? They are wearing lace. Okay, so lace would not be made by a machine. You would have to do it with bobbins. And so let's see here. Here is the Vermeer that we're going to see in a couple of minutes, but just to show you the importance of lace. So all the white that you see here is lace. This is lace. And then this is also lace that has been starched to stand out from the neck. And this is a ruff, R-U-F-F. So let me zoom in and you can see, right, how intricate this lace is and how intricate his collar is. It'll resolve in just a second here. And you can see also that Frans Hals has a very loose brush stroke for which he is well known. He's referred to as the happy painter. And you can see how there's not much blending. It's kind of abstracted, okay? She's wearing this cap, which indicates that she's married. She does have a ring, but very restrained in terms of jewels. But this is still very nice fabric, okay? We have trim here. All of this would be handmade. We have satins and silks. So there are restrictions on how fine clothing can appear. And so ways would be developed to get around that. So you can't wear bright colors, but maybe you can wear a lot of lace. Or maybe you can't wear as much lace, but you can wear the dark colors in a very nice fabric. Okay, so ways of showing your social status through conspicuous consumption. So this is Vermeer's The Lace Maker. And what you see here, these are individual bobbins, okay? So what she is doing is making lace. And the way that you make lace is you have all these bobbins, and you could have dozens of bobbins, literally, and you would manipulate them. Think about braiding. It's like braiding, but much more complex. And that is how you would create the lace that you see here and here. So this is a time-consuming, expensive process. So just the fact that they're wearing that much lace shows you that they are quite wealthy. Okay, so again, another Frans Hals. Here you see a bit more of his costume. He has a lot of high fashion. He has a ton of lace. Now this painting is more permissive not painting, his fashion is more permissive, in part because of his status as a soldier. And both of these paintings are around 1620, 1625. Okay, so again, this is another Halls. And so what you see here is, this is called the Merry Drinker. So think about what I've just been talking about with the Protestant inclination to be somber, right? And not to display your wealth, right? You can't get to heaven by good works, it's preordained. So the Puritans, think about the Puritans. They're descended from the Dutch Protestants, okay? So the Puritans are who came to America and established the first colonies of Europeans here, well, that we think of as the founding of America, not including Spanish, etc. So very buttoned down, the same people who held the Salem witchcraft trials, okay? And so again, you can see how loose the brush strokes are. And so this seems like an awfully jovial depiction for what we think of when we think of the Dutch Protestant religion. Okay, and so what you have to keep in mind is that these paintings are not necessarily didactic or educational in the way that Italian Baroque paintings were, but they do have a moral. These are moralizing paintings. And so what we're seeing here is a man who looks rather exuberant, and he's offering a glass filled with alcohol. And so what we're seeing here, he's flushed from the alcohol, right? He has a slightly bulbous nose. And all of this is intended as a cautionary note against being loose, against consuming too much alcohol, drinking too much, being too loud, too boisterous. So this is a lovely painting, and you would display it in your home. And it would also have an element of, I know better than to do what is depicted in this image, right? So it's moralizing, and it also lets you kind of set yourself apart from the subject matter. So again, we see a lot of these portraits that, again, feature a lot of lace, but typically very somber colors, okay? We see some servants or enslaved people as well. And again, this is the regentesses of the old men's almhouses. And so this would be where poor old men go when they have no money. And so this was a charity. This was something that was beneficial, that was done for older people who were becoming indigent or didn't have enough money. And you can see how severe these collars are. These are not lace collars. These are fabric collars, okay? And the darkness of their dress, how somber it is. So these are all very characteristic of the Protestant Dutch religion. So again, I just want to show you how really beautiful these works are. So these are the Civic Guard portraits. And again, think about the composition, the formal elements. So we're not going to see the emphasis on the 3Ds of the Italian Baroque, the diagonal, dynamic, and didactic, okay? But we are going to see some aspects of those. So here we can see there are some diagonals, although not as strong as we saw in the Italian Baroque. Okay, this has more movement, and the reason for the colors is because of their status as members of a civic guard. So this is a volunteer group of individuals who serve to guard the city, etc. And again, look at all of this lace that is being utilized. So these are also lace collars, but they're not as heavily starched. And so what we're going to see in Dutch paintings is a lot of still lifes. Okay, and oftentimes, let's see here. Traditionally, yes, perfect. These types of paintings, so this is from 1559, so these are groups of guards. And you can see that there is some variation in the heights, but it is still pretty traditional with, you have rows of people. They're all at roughly the same height. There's not a ton of movement. The hands gesture, but that's it. In comparison with Frans Hal's depictions in 1627, so about 70 years later. Okay, so a lot has changed. There's more emphasis on the liveliness and the movement. Okay, so again, right, these sweeping diagonals, the interest of having someone whose back is turned to the canvas. So you have all these different positions, and the people who are placed at the forefront of these, the people who are particularly emphasized, paid more for their portrait than someone like this, who's depicted as smaller and less important. So the civic guards would commission these portraits to go in their banquet halls, etc., and they would pay for them. And the members individually would pay. And you can see that they can afford to, right? Look at all their lace, okay? But again, those in front have paid more. So again, just a lot here. And you can see how these have changed over time and just the variety of poses. So these are basically the same portraits over and over, different people, but the same portraits. And Halls has figured out ways to depict them in engaging ways. So what we see here is called Mali Baba. And this is a woman who is drinking, and you can see that here in the tankard that she has in her hand. And this is very loose. The brush strokes are almost crude. And you can see that she's kind of blushing, or flushed, I should say, and she seems rather boisterous. Her mouth is open in a loud laugh, and she's associated with an owl. So at this time, the owl has to do with laziness and insanity, poor mental health. Okay, so you can see how really abstracted this is. Okay. So again, this would be a moralizing painting. It's an engaging image, but it is something that you do not want to become. You don't want to emulate. And so we're going to see a lot of that. So we're going to see people engaged in what look like really fun parties and playing musical instruments. And these are often things that you should not want to become like them. Okay, so here we have another female artist who studied with Franz Hals, Judith Leister. This is from 1629, and you can see him here stroking this stringed instrument, okay? And so what you have to understand is that along with moralizing, a lot of the images that we're going to see have an underlying message that is related to often either sex or death. Okay, and so believe it or not, musician images are related with sex. So there are sexual meanings inherent in images of musicians and people singing, and you might have mixed groups singing together, okay? And these will be suggestive, but not necessarily in a lewd way. It is, again, a way to kind of be like, I know better than that. All right, here's a self-portrait of Judith Leister from roughly 1630, and you can see that she depicts herself as an artist, but she's also depicting her social standing. So think about this lace collar. It's extremely intricate. It's heavily starched. Okay, so she's saying that she makes money off her painting, that she makes a good living off of it. But again, you can tell that she's the student of Franz Hals based on the looseness of her brushwork. And she's depicting a musician here. So again, that moralizing element comes into play. This is man offering money to a young woman, or the proposition. And so here we have a woman who's very modestly working on needlework. She is displaying what a virtuous woman should do, and she's ignoring the man offering her money in exchange for sex. So this is something to which you might aspire. Okay, lots of great work. This is another female artist, Clara Peters, with the still life. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Dutch still life, because these paintings are truly exquisite. But as I just mentioned, oftentimes paintings, not portraits, but genre paintings, so paintings of a type or a scene from everyday life. So the musicians are genre paintings. these genre paintings and still life and floral still lifes, these are all examples of death or sex. And this is an example of death. Okay, and you can see how truly beautiful this work is. It's very refined, it's very polished. We have coextensive space, which, if you remember, means that the object is coming into the viewer space. And you can see lemons, and there are fish and capers and rolls and nuts. Okay, and the glasses particularly are truly exquisite. You can see the reflections in them. Okay, just truly, truly beautiful. But this is not just an assortment of things that they thought would be pretty together. This is very deliberate. So what you see here is a lemon, and lemons are an example of wealth. Okay, so you would have to be wealthy in order to be able to buy lemons, because they're not growing naturally in the Netherlands. They would have to be imported, right? And you have, you know, this nice glass and this watch. Okay, so oftentimes with these still life paintings, it will look as if someone has just stepped away. And this has to do with the immediacy of death, the fact that mortality comes for all of us. And something like this watch, which is stopped, it tells you, right, passage of time, stop. So I mentioned memento mori in the Italian, one of the previous lectures, right? Remember death. And so we're going to be seeing a lot of memento mori. Sometimes that will include a skull, but it's not always as obvious or even crude as all that. Okay, so you're going to see tipped over cups. You're going to see, again, this is the same watch, okay, same glass. And this, again, has to do with the fragility of life, how easily life can be upended, all right? And so these are actually works by different people, 3 different people, but you can see how very different they all are. I mean, how similar they all are. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. Okay, and again, you're seeing the same elements here. You're seeing the knife and the lemon. Here you have olives, again, a luxury item, okay, showing off the wealth. And here you have some even more explicit imagery. So we have a glass, these are called roamers, but the glass is broken. So again, right, it's really, really calling out the fact that life is fleeting, it's easily broken, easily vanquished. And then here what we see are oysters, and this would be to put salt on the oysters. And this is a luxury food item, but it's also seen as an aphrodisiac. So the person who's still life, right, who would have been sitting here, it's someone who's wealthy, it's someone who indulges in tastes of the flesh, right, pleasures of the flesh, things like expensive lemons and fancy dishware and sensual aphrodisiac. For those of you who may not be aware, an aphrodisiac is a food that supposedly increases your sexual appetite. So again, you can kind of see how this is just a recurring theme. And there are many of these still lifes, and they're all gorgeous, right? So again, we're seeing the common themes. This one's even more explicit. This is most definitely a memento mori, as you can see by the inclusion of the skull and the bones and the tipped over glass. Okay, so here's a young man holding a skull. This is called vanitas. And vanitas means vanity. So this has to do with the Bible, and there is a verse, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, which can be translated to nothing, nothing, all is nothingness. Okay, so vanitas and memento mores both have to do with the passing of life, how fleeting it is, and reminders that death comes for us all. Okay, so one thing that I do want to show you, and I'm not sure that it is included here, so let me just search for her work, is Rachel Roich. And so this is a female artist who is extremely talented, and this work is in the DIA. Hopefully you've seen it. It's on the 3rd floor right outside the Dutch Baroque gallery. And you can see here that it has extremely naturalistic flowers with bugs, okay? So this is a really gorgeous still life. You can see these bugs, and this would not have been something that you would have seen in every person's house. You have a very fancy tulip. So tulips were extremely popular and extremely expensive in Holland at the time if you had the right kind. But these are flowers that would not necessarily be blooming together. So this is something that she has very carefully crafted. But if you look at it, you can see that there are signs of wilting and withering and decaying. Okay, so you can see how the leaf is turning brown. You can see that the bugs have chewed holes through the leaves. So again, this is an example of sex or death, death. Okay, so this is also a vanitas, right? It reminds us that this life is beautiful but fleeting, and like flowers, we bloom and then we perish. So all of these really beautiful works have rather grim meanings behind them. Just something to keep in mind. So what we see here is an anatomy lesson from 1617, and this is Pieter van Mierveld, okay? And so you see the surgeon here, and what would happen is a surgeon would dissect a body in public. Essentially, it would be in kind of a theater, and aspiring doctors, etc., would come and learn. And this is Rembrandt's anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. And this is about 15 years later. And you can see how much more dynamic it is. You can see that we have, right, the triangular composition, the pyramid, right? And the gazes direct our view throughout the work. We have some who look at us, but some who are looking at the book here or the body. They're looking all around. So there's a lot more movement and action than is visible here in this older dissection. And Rembrandt is known for his use of tenebrism, right? So the really dark chiaroscuro. And again, we can see, right, the status of these individuals based on their collars, their ruffs, etc. So this is the Night Watch, as it's colloquially known, or it's officially known as the Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Franz Bannock Koch. And so what we see here is a civic guard portrait. So think of the Franz Hals paintings that we looked at with the really loose brush strokes. Okay, this is a very similar sort of image. What we see here is actually not night, it's dawn. It has a varnish which has darkened the work considerably. And we see this group, this civic guard, gathering together and preparing to patrol. Okay, so it has been cropped down, but this piece is massive. It's over life size, right? And you can see the detail that has gone into this piece. So his brushwork is more restrained than Franz Hals, but you can see that there is a lot of detail, as well as the use of impasto. So impasto is where you have a buildup, a physical, tactile buildup of paint. And it creates a certain effect. And so you can see how, right, this effect is not achieved just by applying paint with a paintbrush. He's using impasto. He's using his the butt of his paintbrush to scrape. And something interesting that they've recently discovered that Rembrandt did that you don't necessarily need to know, but it's cool, is that, right, so think about what I've talked about with oil paint and how expensive it is and how you have to hand grind the pigments and the oil. And so these buildups of paint would be expensive. And so the way that Rembrandt got around this issue is that he would take paint that would build up on his palette and he would affix it to the canvas and then cover it in the color that he wanted. So this was not just like hasty painting, hasty brushwork. This was very deliberate. It's a very deliberate effect. All right, so moving on. Again, you can see how similar this is to the portrait of the regentesses of the old men's almhouse. But again, there's more movement inherent here. You're looking up at them. It's a more dynamic portrait than Frans Hals has. And some of Rembrandt's earlier work involved portraits. If you are interested in shoes and fashion accessories, I would really recommend that you look at this man and his wife. They are extremely well dressed. But this is very characteristic of Rembrandt. So this is woman bathing in a stream, and he captures these people in somewhat vulnerable poses, and they don't look super staged. Sometimes they do. And he'll often have an ornate object or costume. But again, a lot of darkness in the background, and these are still somewhat loosely painted. So, and I'm going to try to hurry up because I know I've been talking for a while. So again, right, you can see the texture, okay, the impasto, how loosely painted this is. So moving through, okay, he's particularly well known for his self-portraits. He would depict himself as a character study rather than like an official self-portrait, as an example of his skill and his artistry as a way of advertising himself to potential patrons. But he's very accurate in his depictions. He does not shy away from depicting himself as he actually is. He is unidealized, okay? And he had costumes that make appearances again and again. And he depicted himself frequently throughout his whole life, all right? So moving on, oh, I guess this is a better lace maker. You can see that she has a lot of bobbins here. And so we're going to be seeing a lot of domestic interiors, okay? Moving quickly because I know I've taken a lot of time. But these images show a somber interior with a woman who is acting as a good mother, okay? So continuing. Again, kills me, we have to go this fast. This is not the paternal admonition. That is a title that used to be used, assuming that this young woman was being admonished by her parents. It's actually a scene of a man offering money to a prostitute and her madam. So if that comes up, now you can tell your friends. I don't know if that's the sort of thing that comes up with friends. So anyway, industry, virtue, etc. Okay, really, really beautiful work, really lovely. Again, this is an example of oysters as an aphrodisiac. Okay, and so we're going to see a lot of kind of jokey sort of paintings from some of these artists. So these images are often depictions of doctors visiting young women, and they're doing their best to ascertain why the woman is ill, and it's usually love sickness. And there are various elements included in the painting that tell you this. If you are curious, come and talk to me or shoot me an email. I'd be happy to talk about it. Okay, and so we see raucous houses with broken pottery and the animals stealing the food and drinking. This is a symbol that has to do with sex. Okay, so everything is just run amok. So again, moralizing. Again, moralizing, 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 moralizing. So poor behavior, having to do with drunkenness. And these figures are painted by Adrian van Ostade, and they're painted very crudely. These are caricatures. This is a genre piece. Okay, these are types of people, scenes from everyday life that are not necessarily depictions of a specific individual or a specific event, simply a type. Again, I really wish that we could spend the time to talk about this, but unfortunately we just don't have the time. Vermeer, okay, this is one of his few landscapes, and you can see again the 1/3, 2/3. And this is interestingly cropped, okay, but he's best known for his depictions of women in domestic interiors. And this is known as the milkmaid. And so what you notice about Vermeer's work is that these are very still, they're very calm, very peaceful works. There's not typically a lot of action. They're not particularly dramatic. And Vermeer is known for this calmness, but he's also known for using these dots of light paint to indicate light hitting an object, even if it wouldn't necessarily hit it in that way. So look at how effective the handle is. It really works. But if you think about it, it wouldn't necessarily, this is in shadow, right? The light might not actually hit it in that way. So this is a trick that he uses, but it doesn't make sense when you really try to think about the mechanics of it. Okay, and so we're seeing slightly brighter colors. Keep in mind that Vermeer is Catholic, he is not Protestant. So again, the stillness that pervades these images. Girl with a pearl earring, this is not a portrait of a specific woman. This is an example of his skill. This is what's known as a trony, a character study. And so it has become extremely famous, but it's not, you know, a specific portrait of a specific woman. And what you see here is, again, stillness, and the pinky of this woman, the raised pinky, is the vanishing point for the entire image. There's actually a little pinprick there from which he drew the orthogonals. And you can see this woman is measuring her gold and her jewelry. She's measuring her wealth in the physical world, okay? But again, it's very still. She's very, she's contemplating, because I can't say that word right now. And above her, you can see a painting of Jesus at the Last Judgment, and he is saving some and condemning others. And so she's thinking about this in conjunction with her worldly wealth. Okay. So again, these are all Vermeer's. We only have about, I think, 35 works known to be by him. Here's the Lace Maker as shown before. So these are really beautiful and technically adept pieces, and I would strongly encourage you to take a look if you get a chance. So we see a lot of landscape as well. And so Haarlem was known for its linen. And what you see here is linen stretched across the landscape in order to bleach it in the sun. You can see little windmills. Okay, so the Dutch, as I mentioned before, are extremely proud of their land because they have reclaimed it from the sea. And so what you see is very accurate depictions of the land. I'm going to move forward, and we're going to talk about the Flemish art. Oh, one last thing that I did want to point out is these roughly, what these come down to are essentially architectural portraits. So these are exaggerations of what the actual churches look like. But, and you can see how exaggerated, right? It's not this tall. The people are not as small in comparison to the columns. But if you were to take this and kind of shrink everything down, make it more of a reasonable size, this is what the churches would look like. They're very plain, they're very sterile, they're very whitewashed. We're not going to see a lot of imagery here. It's not very fancy, and this has to do with the Protestant religion again. A lot of animals. These are little chicks that this artist would paint and then just kind of copy and paste, but with painting into other works, so he didn't have to work them out. Oh, I did have Reich. Okay, so Rubens. So we're going to be looking at the Flemish. And so these are artists who are in Flanders. Excuse me, so this is under Spanish rule. And so these are not Protestants, these are Catholics. And so we're going to see a lot more exuberance and color, right? We're not under the Protestant restrictions of color in clothing, etc. But we are going to see some amount of secular painting, more so than in Italy, as well as a lot of mythological work. So this is an early Peter Paul Rubens, and you can see how it's similar to many of the works that unfortunately we just kind of skimmed over, in the way that this satin is depicted in the finery and the lace collar, and the aggrandizing background, but more color. And then Rubens becomes extremely exuberant, and he has this real fascination with very fleshy women. And so this specific body type has actually come to be known as Rubensesque. And you can really feel his affection for the fleshiness of these women, okay? But there is less religious subject matter, but it's not eliminated. And so you can see that there is more drama inherent in these works. So this is Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel was thrown into a lion's den, and he survived without a scratch overnight because God saved him. And so they knew that he was a true prophet, essentially. Okay, so you can see this exuberance as well as the influence of the Italian Baroque here in this, The Raising of the Cross, 1610 by Peter Paul Rubens. Okay, so you can see diagonals. It is didactic, it's educational, right? And you can see the musculature. So he really, really emphasizes the physicality of his bodies. These are not ephemeral or ethereal individuals. These are very firmly bound to the earth, okay? And you can see the musculature in this back. You can see how it's almost kind of inspired by mannerism, but it doesn't take it to the extreme that mannerism does. And you can see that they are really straining under the weight of Christ's body. So this is not an easy task. Think of the Descent from the Cross by, say, Pontormo, and how elegant and thin and kind of loose the figures are. By that, I mean like they could kind of do the wave, like undulate. That was not super great on a video. But anyway, so the physicality of these figures, okay? And Rubens is the best known of the Flemish/Dutch Baroque. And again, we're going to see elements from both the Dutch Baroque as well as the Italian Baroque. This is from a very famous cycle or series of paintings having to do with Marie de Medici and her arrival in France as queen. And you can see here, this is Marie, and she has been brought over. She's being accepted into France. She originally comes from Italy, and she's being heralded by these mythological creatures who are so excited for her. And again, look at the tenderness with which this flesh is painted. It's not painted with revulsion. Okay, so he has kind of soft, sentimental, colorful works, okay? And again, he really has a type, and he marries women of this type. This is Jacob Jordaens, a similar artist working in similar fashion. We have Anthony van Dyck, okay, who is somewhat similar to Rubens, and I believe trained under Rubens, but much less emphasis on the physicality. His figures are much more elegant. Okay, so again, the emphasis on the color and the quality of the fabrics, right? These are standing portraits, which we said we don't see often in the Dutch Baroque because standing portraits can indicate pride, okay, etc. So, as much as I hate to say it, I think that will conclude the Dutch and Flemish Baroque for us. And I'll see you again soon.